In the heart of a small village nestled between rolling hills, Amina sat in her humble home, staring at the crackling fire in the hearth. The ashes swirled up into the air, as though they too were lost in thought. Her heart felt heavy, and her mind, clouded with worry, couldn't focus on anything but the sound of her son's hungry stomachs growling. It had been 2 long years since her husband's death, and life had become an uphill struggle. Amina's hands were worn, her face etched with lines of sorrow and exhaustion. Yet she never stopped trying. She sold whatever little she could, milk from her single cow, vegetables from her small garden, and occasionally, she would take on odd jobs for the wealthier villagers. But it was never enough. The village was a tight-knit community, but even in such a place, the poor often found themselves on the edge, with no safety net to fall back on. Amina's 2 sons, Idris and Yasin, were still just children. Idris, at 12, was quiet but strong, and Yasin, at 10, full of energy and optimism, always ready to smile despite their hardships. One afternoon, as Amina sat by the well, trying to wash away the dirt of another long day, a man approached her. His name was Omar, a wealthy farmer who owned vast lands on the outskirts of the village. He had always been generous in his own way, but his wealth and power made many villagers wary of his intentions. "Amina," he called out, his voice smooth and commanding. "I've seen your struggle. I've heard the rumors of your situation. I can offer you a solution." Amina looked up at him, her heart sinking. She had heard the rumors about Omar, how he often made offers that seemed too good to be true. Yet, desperation clouded her judgment. "I have work on my farm," Omar continued. "I need someone who can work hard, someone trustworthy. You and your sons could live comfortably, and in return, when they are old enough, they can come work for me on my farm. It's a good arrangement. What do you say?" Amina's heart raced. The idea of a roof over her sons' heads and food in their bellies was tempting, but something inside her hesitated. She didn't like the way he spoke of her sons, as if they were mere assets to be used when the time came. But what choice did she have? "I will need time to think about it," Amina replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing within. Omar nodded, his lips curling into a small smile. "Take all the time you need. I'm sure you'll see the wisdom in it." As he walked away, Amina sat down by the well, her mind swirling with thoughts. Was this the only way forward? Could she really entrust her sons to a man like Omar? The moral weight of her decision pressed down on her chest, but her love for her children outweighed everything. She had to make a choice, and soon. That night, as Amina prepared a meager meal of rice and lentils, Idris and Yasin sat at the table, watching her with concern in their eyes. They knew their mother was struggling, though they didn't fully understand the depths of it. "Mama," Idris asked quietly, "are we going to be okay?" Amina's heart broke at the question, but she forced a smile. "We will be, Idris. We always are." Yasin, ever the optimist, piped up, "We can do anything, Mama. We're strong, just like you." Amina's eyes welled up with tears. "You too are stronger than you know." As the days passed, Amina found herself caught in a web of emotions. The weight of the decision to accept Omar's offer gnawed at her. She had always prided herself on her independence and determination, but now, in the face of overwhelming hardship, she felt as if her choices were limited. But then, one evening, as Amina sat by the fire with her sons, something changed. Idris, who had been quiet and thoughtful all evening, spoke up. "Mama," he said, "I've been thinking, if you take the work from Omar, what will happen to us? Will we have to work for him forever?" Amina hesitated. "It's just for a few years, Idris. You and Yasin will grow up and help him on his farm." Idris looked at his mother, his eyes full of understanding. "But what if we don't want to? What if we want to stay here with you?" Yasin nodded. "Yeah, we don't have to go anywhere to be strong, right?" Amina's heart swelled with pride. Her sons, despite their youth, already understood the value of independence and the importance of family. She realized, in that moment, that her children were her greatest strength, not the promise of a comfortable life at the expense of their freedom. That night, Amina made a vow to herself. She would not allow Omar's offer to rob her children of their future. She would find another way, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. The next day, Amina walked to Omar's farm, her steps heavy with resolve. She had made up her mind. She would not let her sons be trapped by a life of servitude, no matter how comfortable it seemed. She would find another way to provide for them, one that didn't compromise their dignity. Omar greeted her warmly when she arrived. "Amina, I knew you'd come around." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "I've thought about it, Omar, and I've made my decision. I won't accept your offer." Omar's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "You'll regret this, Amina. I'm offering you security, something that many would dream of." Amina shook her head. "No. The greatest security I can give my sons is the freedom to choose their own path, not one that ties them to your farm." Omar's face hardened, but Amina didn't waver. She had made her choice, and she was at peace with it. As she walked away from the farm, a sense of relief washed over her. Her heart no longer felt heavy with the weight of the decision. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but now she felt empowered. Her sons would grow up strong and free, just as they were meant to be. "Mama," he said, "I've been thinking, if you take the work from Omar, what'll happen to us? Will we have to work for him forever?" That night, after Amina prepared a modest meal of rice and lentils, Idris and Yasin sat at the table, their eyes filled with concern. They could feel the tension in the air, the weight of their mother's silent worries. Their hunger was evident, but it was not just food they needed. They needed hope. They needed reassurance that things would be better. "Mama," Idris asked quietly, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone older than his years, "are we going to be okay?" Amina paused, spooning rice into their bowls. She wanted to say something comforting, something to ease their fear. But how could she? How could she promise them everything would be fine when she, herself, didn't know how she was going to keep them fed for the next few days? "We will be, Idris. We always are," Amina replied, her voice steady even though her heart was heavy. Yasin, who was always full of energy and optimism, chimed in with his usual enthusiasm, trying to break the tension. "We can do anything, Mama. We're strong, just like you." Amina managed to smile, but it was bittersweet. "You too are stronger than you know," she said softly. "More than I could ever ask for." As the night wore on, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that something had to change. The weight of Omar's offer continued to press against her, and the idea of her sons working on his farm, serving him, didn't sit right with her. She loved her children more than anything, and the thought of them being tied to someone else's land, working under someone else's thumb, was unbearable. The following days were filled with an oppressive silence. Amina's thoughts swirled endlessly, and every glance she shared with her sons was filled with unspoken words. What kind of future was she creating for them? Could she really choose security at the cost of their freedom? Then, one evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon and the sky blushed with pink and orange, Idris spoke again. His voice was quiet, but there was something resolute in it. Amina's breath caught in her chest. She hadn't expected Idris to voice her own fears so clearly. "It's just for a few years, Idris. When you're old enough, you and Yasin can help him on the farm. You'll have a good life, with food and shelter." Idris stared at the floor for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. Then, he looked back up at her, his gaze steady and determined. "But what if we don't want to, Mama? What if we want to stay here? With you?" Amina's heart ached at his words. It was so simple, yet so powerful. They didn't want to be bound to a life of servitude. They wanted to grow, to have the freedom to choose their own paths in life. And in that moment, Amina realized something profound. Her children were not helpless. They were already showing more wisdom than many adults in the village. They understood what it meant to be free, to have choices. Amina's own heart had been filled with fear and doubt, but now she saw that her sons were the true source of her strength. Yasin, full of the unbridled optimism that made him so endearing, added with a grin, "Yeah, Mama, we don't have to go anywhere to be strong, right?" Amina laughed softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "No, Yasin, you're right. You too are stronger than you realize." The weight of her decision to turn down Omar's offer felt suddenly lighter. She wasn't alone in this fight. Her sons, too, were strong, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Amina woke early, the cold air biting at her skin as she stepped outside to tend to her small garden. Her hands moved mechanically, as though her body was preparing for the difficult conversation that awaited her. She knew she had to make a decision, and the more she thought about it, the more her resolve solidified. Omar's offer wasn't just about survival. It was about control, and Amina would not let her sons become pawns in his game. After finishing her morning chores, Amina walked to Omar's farm, her heart pounding in her chest. The sun was already high in the sky, and the village was alive with the usual bustle. But all Amina could think about was the choice she was about to make. Would she face the consequences of turning down Omar's offer, or would she take the easy way out and sacrifice her sons' futures for the illusion of security? Omar's farm loomed ahead, its vast fields stretching as far as the eye could see. As Amina approached, Omar was standing near the gate, his arms folded and a knowing smile on his face. "I knew you'd come, Amina," he said, his tone warm but laced with an underlying sense of triumph. "I'm glad you're ready to accept the offer. It's a good deal for you and your sons. You'll see." Amina stood tall, her shoulders square, and looked him directly in the eye. "I've thought about it, Omar, and I've made my decision." She took a deep breath. "I won't accept your offer." For a moment, Omar's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed, but his expression quickly returned to its polished, charming facade. "You'll regret this, Amina," he said, his voice calm but cold. "I'm offering you security, something that many would dream of." Amina shook her head, her voice firm. "I don't want security at the cost of my children's future. The greatest gift I can give them is the freedom to choose their own path." Omar's eyes flashed with something dark, but he said nothing further. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Amina standing there, her decision made. As Amina made her way back to her modest home, a wave of relief washed over her. The weight of her choice had been heavy, but now it felt like a burden had been lifted. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be days when she would doubt herself, days when the struggle would seem too much. But as long as she had her sons, she knew they would make it through. Over the next few weeks, Amina found work in the village, small jobs here and there that kept them afloat. It wasn't easy. There were days when the hunger pangs would strike, when they would go to bed without a full meal. But Amina never gave up. She was determined to make it work. Idris and Yasin helped in every way they could. Idris, despite his young age, took on the responsibility of looking after their cow, making sure it was fed and healthy. Yasin, with his boundless energy, helped with the garden, running around collecting firewood, and even attempting to mend some of the broken tools. Their small acts of help meant the world to Amina. They had a strength she hadn't realized before, an unwavering kindness that kept her going even when times were tough. The village began to notice the resilience of Amina's family. Some of the wealthier villagers, moved by the sight of Amina's determination, began offering her more consistent work. It was still hard, but little by little, things began to improve. As the days passed, Amina found peace in knowing that she had made the right choice. She had not chosen the easy path, but the one that would allow her children to grow up free, to decide their own futures. She had given them the greatest gift of all, the freedom to choose who they would become. And as she looked at Idris and Yasin, she knew that they would grow into young men who embodied the strength, kindness, and freedom that would shape the future of their village. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. And no matter how difficult the journey, Amina knew they would always have each other. The morning air was crisp as Amina awoke before dawn. Her bones ached from the previous day's work, but her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. The decision to refuse Omar's offer still echoed in her mind, not with regret, but with pride. She had chosen integrity over comfort. She had chosen her children's future over ease. She stepped outside and looked at the garden. It was modest but thriving. Carrots, spinach, and beans peeked out of the soil, nourished by her son's eager hands and her own determination. Idris had woken even earlier and was already feeding their cow, while Yasin watered the plants, humming a tune as he worked. As the sun rose higher, the village began to stir. Amina wrapped a scarf around her head and made her way toward the small village center, carrying a basket of fresh spinach and goat milk. She had heard the baker was looking for ingredients to trade for bread. The villagers she passed greeted her with more warmth now. A few weeks ago, she had been just another struggling widow, but something had shifted. Her quiet resilience was beginning to be noticed. At the baker's stall, she was met with a pleasant surprise. Amina, said Farouk, the baker, a burly man with a soot-covered apron. I've been meaning to speak with you. Your spinach and milk have been getting popular. A few of the shopkeepers have asked about them. They say your garden is the best in the village. Amina blinked, unsure how to respond. Farouk smiled. I'd like to offer you a regular trade. Milk and vegetables for bread. And if you're willing, I could use help in the mornings. Amina's heart leapt. A steady trade. A small job. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I'd be honored, she said, trying to keep the emotion from her voice. When she returned home with warm bread in hand, her sons ran to her, eyes wide with joy. Mama, Yasin shouted, is that real bread? Fresh from the oven, she said, handing them pieces. Idris took his with reverence, as though holding something sacred. As they ate, Amina told them about the job at the bakery. It's not big, she said, but it means we'll have food every day. That's more than big, Mama, Idris said. That's everything. Weeks turned into months. The garden grew. And so did Amina's reputation. She began to teach other women how to grow crops in small spaces, and soon the village had pockets of green in places that had long been bare. Yasin and Idris had begun attending lessons from the village elder, who had taken notice of the boys' curiosity. Though they didn't have money for formal schooling, the elder allowed them to sit in on teachings about plants, the stars, and stories from generations past. One afternoon, as Idris returned from the elder's house with a scroll of notes, he looked more serious than usual. Mama, he said, sitting beside her while she spun thread, do you ever think about leaving the village? She stopped, surprised. Why do you ask? I heard there's a school in the town past the hills. They teach science and medicine. Yasin and I, we talk about it. Maybe when we're older, we could go there. Learn more. Help more. Amina's breath caught. The thought of her boys leaving both frightened and thrilled her. But this was the kind of dream she had hoped her choice would allow them to have. If that is what you want, she said, brushing a hand through his hair, then I will help you get there, even if I have to walk you every step of the way. But not everyone was happy about Amina's growing independence. Omar had been watching from a distance. The woman he had once seen as desperate and dependent was now gaining respect. She no longer came to him, eyes pleading, and that bothered him. One evening, Omar arrived at her home uninvited. He stood by the gate, arms crossed, as Idris opened the door. Where's your mother? He demanded. Amina stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. Her back straightened as soon as she saw him. Omar, she said coolly, I hear you're building quite a little empire here. Vegetables, trade, helping others. But let's not forget, none of this would have been possible without my offer. With all due respect, Amina said firmly, everything I've built without your help. Omar chuckled darkly. Don't get too proud, Amina. This village still listens to me. Be careful your ambition doesn't make you enemies. Amina didn't flinch. Let them listen to you. I'll let my work speak for itself. Omar stared at her for a long moment before walking away. He was not used to being defied, especially not by a widow with nothing but a cow and a garden. But Amina was no longer that woman. She had become something more. The incident with Omar only strengthened Amina's resolve. That week, she gathered the village women and shared her plans to form a co-op, a collective group that would grow, share, and sell produce together. With many hands, they could help feed the whole village and stand stronger against those who sought to control them. The idea was met with excitement, and within weeks, more gardens bloomed, and more homes saw full plates. But progress never comes without resistance. One night, Amina woke to the smell of smoke. Idris shouted from outside, Mama! The shed. She ran out, her heart pounding. Flames danced across the storage shed that held tools, seeds, and supplies. Villagers came running with buckets, helping douse the fire. After an hour, the flames were gone, but the damage was done. Amina stood, soot-covered, staring at the ruins. Someone had set the fire. There was no question in her mind. Omar. But instead of breaking down, Amina turned to the villagers who stood by her. This won't stop us, she said, her voice loud and clear. This will only make us stronger. And they believed her the fire was only the beginning of the next challenge. But Amina had chosen her path, and she would not be shaken. With her sons beside her, a village growing behind her, and her resolve unshaken. She would face whatever storm came next. The winds of change were no longer blowing. They were roaring.
The charred remains of the storage shed still smoldered in the dawn light. Ash drifted through the air like black snow, settling over the garden that had once symbolized growth and resilience. Amina stood among the rubble, her hands blistered from the fire buckets, her eyes bloodshot but dry. She had cried her last tear for what had been lost. Yasin crouched beside a blackened tool handle, poking it with a stick. "Do you think he did it?" he asked quietly. "Great. Here's part 4 of Amina's choice." The charred remains of the storage shed still smoldered in the dawn light. Ash drifted through the air like black snow, settling over the garden that had once symbolized growth and resilience. Amina stood among the rubble, her hands blistered from the fire buckets, her eyes bloodshot but dry. She had cried her last tear for what had been lost. Yasin crouched beside a blackened tool handle, poking it with a stick. "Do you think he did it?" he asked quietly. Amina didn't need to ask who he was. She nodded once. "I do." Idris stood nearby, his jaw clenched. "We can't let him get away with it." Amina looked at her sons, their youthful faces hardened by the cruel fire of experience. "We won't fight him with fire," she said. "We fight him with what he fears most." "What's that?" Yasin asked. "Community," Amina said. "Unity, and the truth." That very afternoon, Amina called for a gathering at the village square. Word of the fire had already spread, and whispers of arson carried on every breeze. Dozens of villagers showed up, including several women from the garden co-op, their faces lined with worry and quiet rage. Amina stepped forward, standing on a wooden crate, so she could be seen. "Last night someone tried to silence what we've built," she said. "But we will not be silent. We will not be afraid. We will rebuild together." Some villagers murmured support. Others looked around nervously. "What proof do you have it was Omar?" 2 weeks after the fire, a stranger came to the village. He was tall and thin, wearing a travel-worn cloak, with a satchel slung over his shoulder. He introduced himself as Khalid, a herbalist and wandering scholar. Amina first saw him at the market, speaking kindly to the elder, offering samples of dried herbs and remedies. Later that day he knocked on her gate. "Word of your garden has reached farther than you think," he said with a smile. "I came to see the woman who built green from nothing." Amina raised a brow. "You've heard of me? Let's say, the world pays attention to where courage lives." Khalid offered to help rebuild the shed and offered seeds from lands far beyond the village, medicinal plants, drought-resistant crops, and rare herbs. Amina, though cautious, agreed. His knowledge was deep, and his sincerity hard to ignore. In the evenings, as they worked side by side planting and planning, they exchanged stories. He spoke of distant cities, of women leading healing centers, of land reclaimed by community farms. Amina listened with wonder, her world widening by the hour. But even as she opened her heart to possibility, something else stirred within her. Hope not just for survival, but for growth, for love, and maybe for a new beginning. Of course Omar was watching. Seeing Khalid in the village, working beside Amina, made his anger boil. He had lost his hold over the village. Respect had shifted to someone else, someone who had never tried to control, only to help. And so Omar made his final move. He went to the village council, made up of elders and merchants, and accused Amina and Khalid of conspiring to take over village lands, using the co-op as a front. She has no husband, no authority, and now this outsider comes with talk of medicine and trade? They want to make this village theirs. The council was divided. Some believed Omar, others hesitated. Amina was summoned. The charred remains of the storage shed still smoldered in the dawn light. Ash drifted through the air like black snow, settling over the garden that had once symbolized growth and resilience. Amina stood among the rubble, her hands blistered from the fire buckets, her eyes bloodshot but dry. She had cried her last tear for what had been lost. Yasin crouched beside a blackened tool handle, poking it with a stick. "Do you think he did it?" he asked quietly. "Great. Here's part 4 of Amina's choice." The charred remains of the storage shed still smoldered in the dawn light. Ash drifted through the air like black snow, settling over the garden that had once symbolized growth and resilience. Amina stood among the rubble, her hands blistered from the fire buckets, her eyes bloodshot but dry. She had cried her last tear for what had been lost. Yasin crouched beside a blackened tool handle, poking it with a stick. "Do you think he did it?" he asked quietly. Amina didn't need to ask who he was. She nodded once. I do. Idris stood nearby, his jaw clenched. We can't let him get away with it. Amina looked at her sons, their youthful faces hardened by the cruel fire of experience. We won't fight him with fire, she said. We fight him with what he fears most. What's that? Yasin asked. Community, Amina said. Unity, and the truth. That very afternoon, Amina called for a gathering at the village square. Word of the fire had already spread, and whispers of arson carried on every breeze. Dozens of villagers showed up, including several women from the garden co-op, their faces lined with worry and quiet rage. Amina stepped forward, standing on a wooden crate, so she could be seen. Last night someone tried to silence what we've built, she said. But we will not be silent. We will not be afraid. We will rebuild together. Some villagers murmured support. Others looked around nervously. What proof do you have it was Omar?
The day after the council's decision, the village felt different. Not because of noise or celebration, but because of quiet affirmation. People smiled more. Doors stayed open longer. Children ran freely in the fields. The fear that had lingered like smoke after the fire had finally lifted. Amina sat outside her home, weaving a basket with Yasin beside her and Khalid nearby sorting through his herbs. Idris had gone to the elder's hut to help with some scroll copying. Life, though still hard, had found a rhythm. You've changed this village, Khalid said, not looking up. Amina smiled faintly. I didn't do it alone. You didn't, but you showed them they could be more. She didn't reply. Instead, she let the wind carry the silence between them, comforting and unspoken. That night, Amina found Idris and Yasin talking in hushed tones under the moonlight. She sat beside them, and Idris turned with a determined expression. Mama, he said, we want to go to the town beyond the hills, to the school. Amina looked from one son to the other. Yasin nodded quickly. They say they take students with promise. We can apply if someone writes for us. And we already asked the village elder, Idris added. He said he would write our recommendation. Amina's heart swelled with a storm of emotions, pride, fear, joy, and sorrow all at once. You're still so young, she said softly. We're ready, Idris said. We want to do more. Amina pulled them both into her arms. Then you'll go, and I'll make sure you have everything you need. Over the next weeks, the village helped prepare. The women of the co-op sewed bags and stitched warm cloaks. Farouk the baker offered dry biscuits and honey. Khalid gathered herbs for long travel. Amina, every night, quietly set aside the few coins she earned from trades. One afternoon, Khalid approached her with a small wooden box. This is for their journey, he said. Amina opened it to find carefully wrapped packets, healing balms, dried fruit, and a few silver coins. You've already done enough, she said, touched. I was once a boy with dreams too, he replied. I would never forgive myself if I didn't help them chase theirs. There was a moment of silence. Then Amina looked at him, eyes thoughtful. Why do you help me, Khalid? Not just them. He paused, then answered quietly. Because I believe in you, and I want to see where your journey leads to. The morning of the boys' departure was filled with tears and laughter. Half the village came to see them off. Idris carried a rolled-up scroll with the elder's seal. Yasin wore the co-op's woven emblem on his cloak. Amina hugged them tight at the village edge. You are my roots, she whispered. But now you grow wings. Idris smiled. And we'll come back, stronger, wiser. Yasin wiped his eyes. You'll still have Khalid to help. The boys waved as they walked toward the hills, the sunrise ahead of them. Amina stood watching until they disappeared. With her sons gone, Amina poured her energy into the village. The co-op expanded beyond food, into education, crafts, and even healing with Khalid's guidance. A new center was built beside the banyan tree, where villagers gathered not just for trade, but for storytelling, skill sharing, and celebration. The scars of the fire remained, but they were no longer signs of loss. They were marks of resilience. Khalid, too, stayed, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he chose to. One evening, as Amina returned from the co-op, she found Khalid waiting by the garden gate. I'm thinking of building a home here, he said casually, then looked at her. Would that be all right? Amina's smile was slow, genuine. You already have one. With her sons gone to seek knowledge and a new chapter unfolding in the village, Amina's world is growing. But will her past stay silent? Will the boys face trials of their own in the city, beyond the hills? The garden was in full bloom. Bright marigolds lined the walkways, and climbing beans wound around bamboo poles like green serpents stretching toward the sun. Amina moved between rows with a calm focus, her hands deft and steady. But her heart was elsewhere, on a dirt path winding through distant hills, where her sons had walked weeks earlier. Then came the letter. It arrived wrapped in coarse cloth, tied with a simple string, and bore the seal of the town school. Amina's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the page. Dearest Mama, we arrived safely. The journey was long, but the stars above the hills are brighter than any we've seen before. The school is grand. We sleep in wooden bunks and wake with the sun. Idris has already impressed the teachers with his reading. I help in the kitchen when I can, and guess what? We planted a small herb garden behind the dorms. It reminds me of home. We miss you every day. Love. Yasin Amina read it 3 times. Each time, her chest swelled with pride and pain. Her boys were becoming men, but without her nearby. In the weeks that followed, the village blossomed. With Amina's leadership and Khalid's gentle wisdom, the co-op expanded to include a learning hut for children who couldn't afford formal schooling. Amina taught basic arithmetic and reading. Khalid taught about plants and healing. Elders told folk tales under the banyan tree, passing history from voice to voice. But not everyone was pleased. A small group of elders grumbled that tradition was being lost, that women were becoming too bold, that outsiders, meaning Khalid, were changing too much. Amina heard the whispers. She was just a widow. She should remember her place. Khalid noticed the tension too, but Amina only smiled when he brought it up. Change is like planting a seed, she said. It pushes the soil, breaks it open. That's the only way it grows. One evening, a girl named Hafsa came running to the co-op, out of breath and wide-eyed. They're saying someone's planning to accuse you, she gasped, that you've been stealing from the village fund. Amina froze. It was a lie, of course, meant to shake the trust she'd built. But a lie, if told often enough, could cause damage. That night, Khalid confronted one of the murmuring elders. You all watched her rebuild this place from ashes, he said. Why tear her down now? She's made herself too important. The man replied coldly, and you've helped her do it. A village meeting was called again. Under the same banyan tree, the people gathered. The elder who had long supported Amina was now quiet as the air bristled with accusation. We ask only transparency, one elder said. Where is the money being used? Who controls it? Amina stood. Her voice did not waver. The fund is public. The records are open. If you doubt me, read them. She handed over the co-op's ledger. The numbers were simple, honest. Every purchase was noted. Every contribution logged. A young man named Bashir, who had recently joined the co-op, stood up. I manage these records, he said. I've seen her give more than she ever takes. She even skipped meals to feed others. Murmurs rose, not in suspicion, but in support. The elder who had accused her stepped back, unsure now. Later that night, rain pounded the rooftops. Amina stood by her doorway watching the storm, her shawl drawn tight. Khalid joined her, an oil lamp flickering in his hand. They'll keep testing you, he said softly. I'm not afraid of tests, she replied. But I won't lie. Sometimes I wish I could rest. Just for a while. He turned to her. You don't have to do everything alone, Amina. There was a pause. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, a simple band of twisted copper and stone. I've seen many places, but I've never seen anyone like you. If you'd let me, I'd stand beside you. Not just here, but always. Amina looked at the ring, then at him. Her eyes were filled with something between disbelief and wonder. I'm not ready, she whispered. You don't have to be, he said gently. I'll wait, as long as it takes. As storms rage within and beyond the village, Amina holds her ground. But new trials loom on the horizon. What dangers await her sons in the world beyond? Will Khalid's love endure the weight of waiting? And can a woman who's built everything from nothing dare to dream for more? Weeks passed in a blur of planting, planning, and perseverance. The season shifted. Cooler winds danced through the village, bringing with them the scent of ripe earth and change. But with the winds came trouble. It arrived in the form of a traveler, dust-streaked, thin, eyes haunted. He carried no name, only a story. Amina was tending the garden when he approached, asking softly, "Are you the mother of Idris and Yasin?" Heart-lurching, Amina stood still.
Yes.
He bowed slightly. "I bring news." The man, a former stable boy at the Hilltown school, told her what she feared and never imagined at once. "There was an attack," he said, "not on the school, but near the quarter where Idris worked part-time. Some merchants blamed a group of village boys for stolen goods. No trial, no questions, just fists and fury." Amina's breath caught in her throat. The man continued, "Your sons, they weren't hurt, not badly, but they were taken, held for days. No charges, no word sent home. Where are they now?" she demanded. "They were released, but warned. The city guards treat boys like them with suspicion. Idris has been speaking out, trying to organize others. He's brave, but it's dangerous." Amina clenched her fists. "Thank you for telling me." The man nodded, then vanished into the wind from which he came. That night, Amina couldn't sleep. Her boys, out there, in a city that didn't care if they were innocent or hopeful. She remembered Idris's quiet confidence, Yasin's boundless kindness, both now walking a knife's edge. Khalid found her standing in the dark, staring at the co-op gate. "You want to go to them," he said. "I need to," she replied. "Then go." She turned to him. "I can't leave everything here." He stepped closer. "And you won't."
I'll stay.
"I'll watch the co-op, the garden, the school. Everything you've built will be here when you return." Her eyes searched his. "What if I don't return?" "Then I'll come find you," he said, without hesitation. At dawn, the village gathered to send Amina off, just as they once had with her sons. Hafsa hugged her. Bashir handed her a map. Farouk gave her flatbread and honey. Khalid gave her a small satchel of herbs and his blessing. She rode on the old trader's cart, wrapped in a wool cloak, the hills rising like stone giants ahead of her. Each bump in the road was a memory. Her sons playing in the mud, laughing under the rain, harvesting their first crops. Each mile carried both fear and hope. 3 days later, the city rose before her, gray walls, smoke trailing from distant rooftops, markets buzzing like restless beehives. She walked through the gates with her head high, though her heart trembled. She asked, she searched, she waited. At last, at a tea stall near the city's outer ward, a boy recognized the names. "Idris? Yasin? They speak for the students. They help run the night kitchen. You'll find them by the eastern dorm." Amina ran. It was just after sunset when she saw them. Idris sitting on the ground, Yasin cooking over a low fire. They looked older, stronger, but when they saw her, "Mama?" Yasin dropped the spoon. Idris stood up so fast he nearly stumbled. She ran into their arms, all three of them holding each other under the darkening sky. No words, just tears, laughter, and breathless relief. As they sat beside the fire that night, Idris told her everything. The beatings, the threats, the way the city treated poor students and rural children as if they were burdens. "But we fight," he said. "We organize. We write. We help the ones who can't speak." Amina looked at him with awe. "You've become more than I ever imagined." Yasin smiled. "That's because we had you." Amina's sons are no longer boys, and their fight is now hers, too. Can she help them navigate a city full of danger and deceit? Can the strength of a mother's love heal a world that seems bent on breaking? The morning air in the city was sharp and unforgiving, laced with the scent of coal, smoke, and sweat. Amina stood beside Idris and Yasin outside the eastern dormitories, watching as young students, some no older than 12, lined up for a meager breakfast. "This is where we feed them," Yasin explained, ladling thin porridge into wooden bowls. "Some of them haven't eaten in days." Amina helped without question. She moved through the line with quiet authority, offering an extra piece of flatbread when she could, a kind word when she couldn't. But under the surface of that routine, tension stirred. Later that day, Idris pulled Amina aside. "The city guards have started watching us more closely. They come by the dorms, ask questions, threaten the teachers." "Why?" she asked. "Because we speak. Because we organize. Because we don't stay silent." Yasin joined them, looking uneasy. "They think Idris is leading some kind of rebellion." "And are you?" Amina asked, her voice calm but firm. Idris paused. "I'm trying to change the rules, to make sure children like us get a chance." Amina took a deep breath. Then you need to be smarter than them. Speak when it's safe. Fight with your mind. That evening, Idris shared a letter from a mentor, a teacher who had once supported his efforts. I believe in your cause, Idris, but there are whispers that you are being followed. Be cautious. Some in power would rather burn truth than face it. Amina read it in silence, her lips tightening. Khalid had once told her, change is a fire. You must know when to feed it and when to shield it from the wind. Now she saw what he meant. She began helping more actively, organizing supply runs, holding quiet reading circles for the younger students, calming the mothers who feared their children would be taken away. 2 nights later, Idris returned to the dorms pale and shaken. They're planning a raid, he said, tomorrow at dawn. They want to break the movement, arrest leaders. Who told you? Amina asked, a market boy. His father overheard guards talking in the barracks. Amina looked around. There were over 40 children sleeping inside the dorm. We have to move them, she said. Tonight. By moonlight, Amina, Idris, and Yasin led the children in small groups through alleyways and sewer paths. They avoided torch-bearing patrols, silenced every footstep. Some children cried silently, clinging to Amina's hands. Others looked around with wide, fearful eyes. They took shelter in the ruins of an old textile warehouse, now abandoned and half swallowed by weeds. There, under broken beams and moth-eaten cloth, they waited. At dawn, they heard the shouts from across the city. The dorms were raided, but they were already gone. Word of the raid spread fast. It wasn't just the students who noticed. It was the merchants, the workers, even the elderly who once ignored the noise. The city had touched something sacred. Children. Amina stood at the heart of the growing protest. No longer just a mother, but a symbol. We feed your children, she said, standing before a crowd in the marketplace. We teach them, we protect them, and you punish us for it. Her voice echoed, and people listened. The storm has broken. The city stands at the edge of reckoning, and Amina is no longer hiding in the shadows. But as allies rise, enemies sharpen their blades in secret. Can this fire of hope survive? Or will it consume everything Amina holds dear? The city had changed. Where once fear silenced the alleys, now voices echoed. Market vendors muttered about injustice. Teachers whispered warnings, and children, those once forgotten, now marched in quiet unity. Amina stood at the center of it all, not because she sought power, but because power had found her. In her unwavering stance, her refusal to kneel, her ability to give warmth in a world that had gone cold. But with that attention came danger. An offer of silence one evening, as she returned from delivering bread to the warehouse refuge, a stranger waited near the gate. He was tall, well-dressed, with a jeweled ring on one hand and a cruel smile. You're Amina, he said, as if confirming a threat. She said nothing. I come from the council, he continued. They'd like you to step back, quietly, before someone gets hurt. Amina's eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? He tilted his head. No, it's a courtesy. You're a mother, yes? Think about your boys. Before she could reply, he turned and vanished into the night. The letter that changed everything that same night. Idris brought her another letter. This time it bore the seal of a legal tribunal. Your presence has been deemed a danger to the civic peace. You are hereby summoned to stand before the city court for incitement and unlawful congregation. Refusal to comply may result in detainment. Amina looked up, her face unreadable. Should we leave the city? Yasin asked. No, she said. If I run, I prove them right. If I stand, maybe others will too. The courtroom Amina entered the court chamber flanked by her sons and a few quiet allies. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the scratching of the scribe's quill. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced man, read a long list of charges: unlawful gatherings, interference with city authority, endangerment of youth. When it was her turn to speak, Amina stepped forward. I taught children to read. I fed the hungry. I hid them when you came with clubs and... The room stirred. Even some guards looked uncertain. The judge leaned back, measuring her. This is not the countryside, he said. We have rules, and your rules forget people. Amina replied.
A pause.
Then the gavel struck. Judgment deferred. She was free for now. The rising tide news of her trial spread beyond the city walls. Villages whispered her name. Former students returned to offer help. A painter captured her image on the walls of the alley. Amina, head high, shawl in the wind. Khalid, far away, heard it too and smiled. Still standing, he murmured. Backlash, but not all celebrated. The council, humiliated, tightened their grip. Raids increased. Food supplies were cut from protest zones. Those who stood with Amina were watched, questioned, harassed. Idris burned with fury. They want to starve us into silence. Amina held his hand. That's when we speak louder, but not with rage, with truth. Yasin asked, but how do we fight them if they won't listen? Her answer came slowly. We build something they can't ignore. A school in the ashes, she found it in a half-burned library near the city edge, abandoned after fire during the last revolt years ago. The walls were scorched, but the bones were strong. We'll rebuild here, she said. Idris looked at the ruins and nodded. For the children. Yasin whispered. For all of us. Words spread fast. Brick by brick, people came to help. Masons repaired walls. Elders brought books. Students painted banners. Khalid sent herbs and letters. In weeks, the free school was born. Nofis, novatekepers. Just knowledge and hope to be continued. Amina has become more than a mother. She is now a symbol. But symbols can be targeted, and the forces rising against her are growing bolder, darker. As the city prepares for a reckoning, will Amina's courage be enough to protect all she's built? The new free school became more than a building, it became a movement. Children from the outer districts came in sandals and torn shirts, eager to learn. Volunteers from the village and city alike offered their hands, their time, and their voices. But as the light of the school grew brighter, the shadows surrounding it deepened. A warning in the dark late one night, Amina found a note nailed to the school's wooden gate. You've made your choice. The city will make theirs. Asterisco no signature. No trace. Khalid, who had arrived just that morning to help, studied the message with narrowed eyes. They're afraid, he said quietly. Afraid that this, education, unity, hope, could change everything. And they're right. Amina replied. Hashtag the spark of fear. The next week, city enforcers arrived again, this time without official letters. They stood at the edge of the schoolyard, watching, measuring. Some whispered threats to passing children. Others simply stared. Amina stood between them and the students, arms crossed. You have no right, she said. One guard sneered. We make the rights here. Not anymore. Her calm defiance spread like fire. A merchant brought his cart closer and offered bread to the students. A seamstress hung banners of resistance from her window. People were no longer afraid to be seen beside her. Hashtag inside the school walls inside. Learning never stopped. Idris taught history and protest poetry. Yasin taught younger children to build, repair, and share. Amina taught letters and courage. Khalid worked in the herb garden, healing minor wounds and listening quietly. But all could feel the pressure building, like a storm gathering above a dry field. Then the explosion came. Hashtag the fire. One night, as lanterns glowed and lessons whispered on the wind, a fire broke out. The western wall of the school, where books had been stacked, where children napped between lessons, was suddenly ablaze. Flames licked the sky. Screams rang out. Amina and Khalid rushed to break open windows. Yasin led children out, coughing. Idris and two older boys carried buckets of water from the well. They fought back the fire for hours. By dawn, half the building had collapsed, but not a single child was lost. The people gathered in silence, watching the charred remains. And then one voice called out, "We rebuild. Asterisk. Hashtag, not ashes. Roots they began before the ashes cooled." Khalid organized a medical tent. Idris made new desks from scrap wood. Amina found the scorched alphabet boards and wiped them clean. A father who once doubted the school now laid bricks beside his daughter. A teacher who had been silent returned to offer lessons. Even the city guards stood down. No orders, perhaps, or no heart to follow them anymore. The fire, meant to end everything, had united them instead. Hashtag, the council reacts. The council met behind closed doors, outraged that the fire had not ended the movement. Some called for open force. Others feared revolt. One man suggested something new. Give him a seat at the table. If we can't stop the voice, bring it into our chorus. ***. So a letter came in offer. Amina of the people, you are invited to speak before the Grand Assembly, to share your demands, your vision, and your terms. The letter was genuine.
Sealed. Public.
Amina read it aloud to her sons and Khalid. What will you do?
Khalid asked.
She looked at the blackened school, then at the circle of children now laughing amid the rubble.
She smiled.
I will speak, not for myself,
for them.
#, to be continued. Amina is no longer just a mother or a leader. She is now the voice of a people rising. But the halls of power are not built to listen. As she enters the Grand Assembly, will her words shake the stone, or will the system swallow her whole? The Grand Assembly chamber was vast, its stone walls towering, its floor polished by centuries of footsteps. It had never welcomed a voice like Amina's. She entered not in silk, but in her plain village shawl, soot-stained from the school fire, eyes steady, back straight. Behind her stood Idris, Yasin, Khalid, and a silent procession of students, workers, mothers, and teachers. The people she represented. The council members murmured, shifting uncomfortably. They expected fear. They got purpose. A voice for the voiceless. When the speaker gestured, Amina stepped forward. I was not born to speak in places like this, she began, her voice calm and clear. I was born to plant millet, fetch water, and raise sons in silence. But when silence steals justice, speaking becomes survival. She told them of the farmer who bartered futures, of the children who labored instead of learning, of the school that rose from ash, and the people who chose books over bribes. Her words were not loud, but they echoed. Some council members looked away. Others leaned in. The turning point, a councilwoman stood. You want equality, education,
food,
protection, and if we do not give it, Amina met her gaze. Then we'll build it without you. And when your walls fall, we won't rebuild them. A silence followed, thick, heavy, undeniable. Then applause rose, not from the council, but from the balconies, where citizens had gathered. It spread like fire. The verdict later that evening, the council voted. Some opposed her, others abstained, but a majority, narrow, pressured, awakened, agreed, to recognize the free school as a legal institution, to fund public education in outer districts, and to place 2 representatives from the people in city forums. One of them would be Amina. 1 year later, the school stood stronger than ever. Children ran through its courtyard, laughter mixing with the rustle of leaves. New teachers had come. New gardens had grown. Amina walked past a mural, her image, hand in hand with a child, painted by a former street boy she once sheltered. Khalid stood beside her. Did you think it would end like this? She smiled.
No,
but I hoped. Idris now trained young leaders. Yasin oversaw school repairs. The sons she once feared would starve had become pillars of strength for hundreds. Final words at a festival held on the anniversary of the school's rebuilding. Amina was asked to speak one last time. She said, you may not choose the world you're born into, but you can choose the kind of world you leave behind. I chose not to trade my children's future for my survival, and that choice changed everything. The crowd stood in silence. Then applause thundered through the city once again. Her story had ended, but her legacy had just begun. The end.